Welcome in, everyone. Today, this video is going to be a hard one, a very disturbing and sickening accounts, and a very hard watch. And if you can't handle hard topics, this might not be the video for you. Viewer discretion is advised. So in this video, we're going to go over the life and crimes of Charles Manson and the Manson family. So buckle up and get ready for this very disturbing and bumpy ride. The Manson family cult, led by criminal and leader Charles Manson, born November 12, 1934. His mother was 15 when she had him. His biological father was known as a con man in his local town. He tricked Charles's mother into thinking he was an army colonel, yet colonel was his given name. So when Charles' mother told his father that she was pregnant with Charles, he said he had to go away on military business. He had no intent of ever returning. Charles never knew his real father. So Charles' mother wound up marrying a man named William Manson. But Charles's mother would often go partying and drinking, leaving Charles with babysitters. His mother divorced his stepfather in 1937, but Charles kept his stepfather's last name, Manson. His mother was incarcerated and leased on parole in 1942. Later on, Charles said that was the happiest time of his life. He lived with his mother, aunt, and uncle in West Virginia. It was a big, happy family, he said. They lived in Charleston, West Virginia. He didn't go to school, and his mother was back to her partying ways. His mother was yet again arrested, but this time for grand larceny, but she was never convicted. So the family moved yet again. They moved to Indianapolis, Indiana. That's where Charles' mother met her next husband, Louis Cavender Jr. She met him at an AA meeting in 1943. Charles mentioned later on, when he was 9 years old, he would skip school, and he even caught his schoolhouse on fire. And at the age of 13, Charles was placed in Gilboa School for Boys. It was a school for troubled males run by Catholic priests. It was a very strict school. They would paddle the students for even the smallest incidents. But Charles had enough, and he decided to run away. He said he decided he'd rather sleep in the woods or the streets than be there. He then arrived at his family's house and spent Christmas with them. But it wasn't all sunshine and rainbows. His mother decided to take him back to Gilboa. Gilboa was located in Terre Haute, Indiana. So Charles stayed at that school for 10 more months, but he decided enough was enough, and he ran away to Indianapolis, a place where he once lived. He got caught up in trouble again, but this time he was convicted. He robbed a grocery store. After that, still being the age of 13, almost 14, he was sent to a juvenile facility called Boys Town. Boys Town was located in Omaha, Nebraska, but he was only there for 4 days. He and another inmate, Blackie Nielsen, somehow managed to get a gun and stole a car. The two committed 2 armed robberies. The two then arrived at Nielsen's uncle's. It was located in Peoria, Illinois. His uncle was what you could call a professional thief, and he took the 2 young men under his wing. They learned the art of being a thief from the man. Charles was caught in a raid on a store. He was then connected to the 2 armed robberies that he committed earlier. He was then sent to another strict reform school in Indiana, but there he was allegedly sexually assaulted by other students, and the staff encouraged it, allegedly. He was also beaten a lot, and he ran away multiple times, but he was always caught. But in February 1951, he and 2 others finally escaped. They robbed gas stations in their way to California. They were caught and arrested in Utah. He was caught and charged with a federal crime of driving a stolen vehicle across state lines. And in 1952, Charles was caught sexually assaulting a boy at knife point. A very sick thing to do. While in prison, he committed 8 more serious offenses. He was then transferred to a max security facility in Chillicothe, Ohio. And surprisingly, he was released a year early for good behavior in 1954. So he returned to live with his aunt and uncle in West Virginia. That's where he met and married his first wife, Rosalie, but then he was caught and arrested for the same crimes because the two got caught stealing a car and driving it from Ohio to California. Rosalie was pregnant at the time, and she gave birth to Charles and hers first child and only child. They named the child Charles Manson Jr. So, Rosalie eventually stopped visiting Charles in prison, and she moved on and moved in with another man. And in 1958, Charles got 5 years probation, while Rosalie also filed for divorce at the same time. After the divorce, Charles ended up in trouble multiple more times. One was for a forged check, but the charges were dropped because of a woman named Leona Stevens pleaded with the court, and she said she loved Charles and she would marry him if he didn't get sentenced. So I guess the court found pity on the story, and the two did get married. Leona was known as an escort, so in 1960, Charles took Leona and another woman to New Mexico so they could make money, if you know what I mean. Charles was then caught, questioned, and released, but he knew that wasn't all of it. He knew they would run an investigation. So he fled, and then he got caught, and he had to serve those 10 years. I know earlier I said 5, but that was a mistake on my part. It was 10 years. He had 10 years of probation. He violated the probation, so he had to serve 10 years of prison time. So during his sentence in prison, he took guitar lessons from a gang member. Leona also filed for divorce of Charles in 1963. She said the couple had a son named Charles Luther Manson, and Charles was released from prison in 1967. But oddly, he said he wanted to stay. He said prison felt like home. Charles then got permission to move to Berkeley in California from his parole officer. He was then assigned to a new one once he arrived in Berkeley. A man named Roger Smith was his new parole officer, and he was also a doctoral researcher, and that's where Manson was introduced and took LSD and methamphetamines. It was for research for Smith. Charles, at the time, had a bit of a following, but it was mainly females. Charles got permission to move to Hyatt, Ashbury. He took LSD quite frequently now, and they studied Charles' behavior while on said drugs. Smith said it was the most abrupt case he has ever seen. Charles wrote a book called Stranger in a Strange Land. That, and all the free love going on at the time, had Charles hooked. He then began to preach his views and values. It was a mixture of Stranger in a Strange Land, the Bible, Scientology, Dale Carnegie, and the Beatles, which gained him a following rather quickly. He also believed Jesus Christ and Satan would come together and judge humanity at Judgment Day. He also started studying Scientology while in jail, and he said it was his religion. And in 1967, he reportedly met with local Scientologists and would attend parties for movie stars. Charles completed 150 hours of auditing, and for anybody who doesn't know what auditing is, it is hypnosis to cause obedience and dependency. His main underling at the time, Bruce Davis, worked at a Scientology headquarters in London. Charles then moved to San Francisco, where he became close to the library assistant at Cal Berkeley. Her name was Mary Brunner. He eventually moved in with Mary. He even persuaded her to allow other women to live with them. Charles brought in 18 other women. He targeted naive and outcasts, people who he could manipulate and control very easily in his mind. And that is the beginning of the Manson family cult. He made his followers believe that they are the reincarnates of the original Christians. Charles and the Manson family got an old school bus where they would put shag carpets and colored carpets where the seats were and over the windows. They went from San Fran to LA, where they eventually settled. Mary eventually became pregnant by Charles, and they had a son. so they coined her with the name Mother Mary. Charles would have the family take LSD where he could control them completely. The family grew to over 20 plus members, which included Mother Mary Brunner, Charles Tex Watson, Bobby Bosoli, Susan Atkins, Patricia Krenwinkel, and Leslie Van Houten, and many more. Charles and the family also had a friendship that went sour with one of the Beach Boys, Dennis Wilson. Wilson let the family live at his residence, but they ravished his home, wrecked his cars. They would steal from Wilson, which eventually led Wilson to telling them to leave, but they wouldn't listen. So Wilson eventually moved out, and the family later on was evicted from the residency. So Charles gave Wilson's maid a bullet to give to Wilson as a threat. So the family moved to Spawn Ranch. A ranch was used in old Western movies and TV shows. The family did quote-unquote favors, if you catch my drift, for the 80-year-old ranch owner, nearly blind, by the way, and he allowed them to live there for free. Now, I will warn you all, this is where everything starts to get very, very disturbing. So, viewer discretion is advised. On March 23rd, 1969, Charles went to 10050 CeeLo Drive, which he knew as the Melcher residence. He was not invited there, of course. He went to the main residence and was met by Sharak Hatami, a photographer who was friends with director Roman Polanski, and his wife, actress Sharon Tate. So, Hatami asked Charles what he wanted, what he was there for. Charles asked for Melcher, but Hatami didn't recognize that name. Hatami told him this was the Polanski residence now. He told him to try the guest house behind the main house. Tate then came behind Hatami while in the house and asked who was that, while they watched Charles go down the path to the guest house. Later that day, Charles went back to the guest house where he spoke with Atolby, the owner. Atolby told Charles Melcher moved to Malibu and he didn't know his new address, even though he did, but he was not going to tell Charles that. He also told Charles to not disturb his tenants anymore. He also told Charles he was leaving for Rome the next day. So Charles told him, "I want to speak to you when you get back." But Atolby said he won't be back for another year. So on the night of August 9th, around midnight, 1969, Watson Krenwinkel went to 10050 CeeLo Drive. Charles ordered to, quote-unquote, totally destroy everyone in it. So, what happened? Mayhem happened. It's very disturbing, sickening, and saddening. It makes me very emotional reading and thinking about this. So please brace yourself. There's a total of 6 people there, including Sharon Tate, who was 8.5 months pregnant at the time, Jay Sebring, Wojciech Frykowski, Abigail Folger, William Garretson, and Steve Parent. So Watson and the others arrived at the residence at midnight. He climbed a telephone tower and cut the telephone line to the house. They parked the car down the hill and climbed a bush to get on the perimeter. They saw headlights approach them, so the women lied down in the bush, but Watson came out to confront the car driver. He made the driver then stop, and then he pulled out a .22 pistol and a knife and rushed the driver. He stabbed the driver in the hand, severing tendons. The driver was Stephen Parent. After he stabbed Stephen, he put 4 shots into him, leaving him dead on the front seat of the car. They moved the car, and then Watson got to the front door and cut a part into the screen while letting the women through the front door. When they got in the house, they were in the living room, and they were talking, and the talking woke up Frykowski, who was laying and sleeping on the living room couch. Watson then proceeded to kick Frykowski in the head, and Frykowski asked who he was and what he wanted. Watson then said quote unquote, "I'm the devil, and I'm here to do the devil's business." Atkins and Krenwinkel then gathered the other occupants of the house and brought them into the living room. Watson tied Tate and Sebring together by the necks with a nylon rope that they had brought. He then threw the rope over ceiling beams, and Sebring was yelling at him for the treatment of Tate, whom was 8.5 months pregnant at the time. So, what did Watson do? Watson proceeded to shoot Sebring. They took Folger to go get her purse to give the intruder $70. Watson, then still in the living room, proceeded to stab Sebring 7 times. Frykowski then got free from his bindings and then started to wrestle with Adkins. He managed to get out the front door, but was caught by Watson and was repeatedly beaten in the head by the gun and shot twice. Cassibian was the lookout for Watson and the other members, and she told Watson that someone was coming to stop the murders. Inside the house, Folger got away from Krenwinkel and got to the pool area. Krenwinkel then chased her down and tackled her and stabbed her. Watson then came over and helped Krenwinkel kill Folger. Folger was stabbed 28 times. Frykowski was stabbed 51 times and brutally beaten with the gun in the head 13 times. It even bent the barrel and broke the grip. That's how viciously he was attacked. It's truly a terrifying and terrible thing to think about. Tate pleaded with the intruders to let her live long enough to give birth to the child. She said she'd give herself as a hostage just so the baby could live and be safe and be free. But they didn't take that offer. They then proceeded to stab Tate 16 times, killing her. They then hung her. Her cause of death was noted as massive hemorrhaging. Adkins wrote "pig" on the front door with Tate's blood. Tex Watson was involved in dealing drugs, so Charles then shot a rival drug dealer named Bernard Crowe. It was at Manson's Hollywood apartment. He dumped the body, but Crowe ended up surviving and later on testified against Charles and the family. Gary Allen Hinman was a musical teacher and a UCLA grad. He became friends with members of the Manson family. They believe he was wealthy and inherited lots of money. So, Charles sent Atkins, Brunner, and Basoli to Hinman's residence, trying to convince him to join the family and turn over all the assets to Charles. But Hinman didn't have all those assets that they thought he did. So, the three held Hinman captive for 2 days in July 1969. Hinman denied having any money at the time, and Charles did not like that. So Charles proceeded to take out a sword and cut Hinman from ear to face. Then Basoli stabbed Hinman to death. They then used Hinman's blood to write "Political Piggy" on the walls and drew a panther paw, a symbol of the Black Panthers. They were trying to frame the organization for the murders. Basoli was arrested on August 6, 1969. He was caught driving Hinman's car, and they found the murder weapon in the tire well of the car. Charles had Cassibian drive to 3301 Waverly Drive in LA. It was next door to where Charles and the family attended a party the previous year. The home belonged to Leon LeBianca, a 44-year-old supermarket executive, and his wife, Rosemary Bianca, a co-owner of a dress shop. Manson tied up the couple and held them at gunpoint. Watson then proceeded to put pillowcases over the couple's heads and tied them with lamp cords. Watson had Krenwinkel and Van Houten go get Rosemary. Watson had Krenwinkel and Van Houten go to the bedroom to get Rosemary, but she kept the women at bay by swinging the lamp that was attached to the cord that was wrapped around her neck. While Watson was in the living room, he stabbed Leon in the neck with a chrome-plated bayonet. He then heard the commotion in the bedroom and proceeded to go there and stab Rosemary with the same bayonet multiple times. He then went back and proceeded to stab Leon 11 more times and carve the word war into his stomach. Krenwinkel then stabbed Rosemary 16 more times in the back and the buttocks, and then in the blood of Rosemary and Leon, and wrote "Rise and Death to Pigs" on the walls, and wrote "Helter Skelter" on the fridge door. 35-year-old Hollywood stuntman Donald Shea was murdered August 26, 1969. Charles told Shea to go on a ride to a car parts place on Spawn Ranch. Shea was in the car with Watson, Bruce Davis, and Steve Grogan. Grogan then proceeded to hit Shea in the head with a pipe wrench, and then Watson started to stab Shea. They took Shea to a hill behind the ranch where they stabbed him multiple times and tortured him to death. In December 1977, the authorities found Shea's skeletal remains. Grogan, who was arrested for the murders, helped the police find the body by drawing a map of where the body was located. The autopsy showed multiple stab wounds had occurred and chopping wounds to the chest and multiple blunt force trauma to the head. So, the Manson family cult was also suspected of the murders of Nancy Warren, Clyda Delaney, Marina Habe, Darwin Scott, Mark Waltz, John Hout, James Sharp, Doreen Gow, Reet Gerveston, Joel Pugh, Ronald Hughes, James Willett, Lawrence Merrick, and Michelle Mignano. So, the Manson family, the ones that committed the murders, were all convicted. Charles was convicted of 7 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of conspiracy to commit murder. He got life without parole and died in 2017 from colon cancer. This video was very, very hard to make and very disturbing and very, very sad and sickening. And I feel so sorry for all the victims and their families. But I hope y'all enjoyed this, and I hope and pray that nothing ever happens like this again. And as always, chat, stay safe.